Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to do a little bit of a discussion on price hikes. This is prompted by the fact that about 1 billion people have asked me to do a discussion on price hikes in the last couple of weeks because it has been a topic in the news with a couple of prominent hikes going on. So first off, I want to be very, very clear here. I am okay with companies raising their prices where it makes sense. It is a simple fact that materials cost more money as time goes on. Unfortunately, the way of the universe, it would appear, is that things get more expensive as time passes. And so, if metal costs more, the knives are going to cost more. Similarly, cost of living is going way up in a bunch of places around the world. That's a whole other economic discussion, but look, I would like the company that makes my knife to pay their people well. And if it is the difference between, charging me $5 more for a knife to treat their people, give them a living wage, give them good health insurance, then that's great. I fully support that. And so those little incremental price increases, like kind of the every year, okay, we're having to raise things by a couple of bucks, sorry about that, but cost of living, I get that, whatever, it's life. But what I think people are talking about here are the more salient increases, where you kind of jump way up suddenly, whether it's across the board or in an individual model, because those really do have a much bigger effect and can be a little bit much more rough. For instance, Spyderco is taking a lot of heat right now for an 8% jump across the board. And because Spyderco uses minimum advertised pricing, I have a whole knife gripe about that separately, not just Spyderco, but so does Benchmade, so does ZT, a bunch of people use it. But it means that every dealer is forced to charge that much money, at least in all advertised sales. And so, as a result, from December 31st, wow, to January 1st, the price of any Spyderco went up 8%. There were some that went up even more than that, but still, that's, a lot of people are giving them crap for that. There's a huge forum, a huge thread on Spyderco's forum right now talking about that. And, I get that. From Spyderco specifically, I'm a little more sympathetic because I've heard from many dealers that it's really tough to make a profit selling Spyderco in his store because the margins have been very thin. And so maybe if that 8% gives them a better margin for dealers to be able to stock it more reliably, that'll be good. That'll make sense. But it's still a bit of a tough pill to swallow, especially when something like the Delica now costs $75. Ooh. And things like that. So that's one place where these have come up. But there have been other major hikes, not just right now, but in the past. Like when Benchmade went to MAP, they went a huge price increase. I think everything went up like $30 or $40. I mean, the 940 went from $40 to, from 140 to 180, I think. And it was 125 a couple of years before that. So, they did major price hikes, and the Grimsmos have done a major increase in their pricing at their the dealer's choice prices, such that my Norseman, which had a retail price of $555, a very, very similar model, although given with the improvements that they put into place, is now going for $925. And so Maker's Choice just got way pricier. So that's another area where it's kind of on the mind. And then some individual knives have gone way up. The Spyderco Shaman, I don't have it on the table at the moment because it's with Frankie and Bird, but that went from $150 to $180 just overnight with the change of the year. That was a big old increase, and so a lot of people are saying, Nick, what do you think about that? Well, let's talk about it a little bit here. As far as I'm concerned, there were kind of 5 issues with a major price increase that can be, troublesome. First off are the optics of it, especially in situations where it is just a price increase. It's not like, okay, we discontinued the Delica 4, we moved to the Delica 5, but guess what? It's it's $10 more. Those people have a little bit more easy of a time with, but when you just don't change anything, you just charge more money, you get a lot of heat for it. Benchmade got heat, Spyderco's getting heat for it right now, the Grimsmos are getting heat for it. Look, no matter the reason, nobody likes it when you suddenly decide that the exact same thing is more expensive. Model changes are very often a better time for this. We discontinue this and then the replacement's pricier. That avoids the bad optics, but that's the very first concern with is it just doesn't look very good to just raise the price with nothing else changing. Even just like a little tweak, like, we're going to charge more for the Delica, but it's now in CPM 154 or 154 CM or something like that. Just to offset that a little bit. That's complicated, but that's one of the issues is the optics. The second issue is that it can put makers in a very tough spot, particularly smaller makers. And most specifically, when makers are trying to raise their prices to match a bubble. It is the case that the knife world is, and particularly the custom and high-end knife world, is a world full of bubbles, where a bunch of people suddenly decide that a given maker is the hottest thing ever, and everybody wants one. The Grimsmos have been in this situation. They have been bubbling furiously for the last couple of years here. And so, it was the case, for instance, that a brand new Norseman was selling for $1,200 in the secondary market, and the Grimsmos appear to have just said, okay, well, if it's selling for $1,200 there, then we've priced too low, and let's go ahead and raise it up and go to $925. They didn't go, full on to the bubble price, but they got pretty close. But the thing is, this is a difficult calculus, because if you keep the table price steady, if they kept charging the same price that they always had for the Norseman, they'd have they'd be leaving a lot of money on the table. That's 100%. And I can see that being really tough, especially when you got family to feed. You got to get paid, that kind of thing. But when you raise to match a price that's bubbling, you might have a really rough time when the bubble pops. Because once everybody is kind of gone home, once people have moved on to the next Tulip Mania knife of the week, once people are, now we're buying Hinderers, now we're buying blah blah blahs, now we're buying Z-Hunters, then suddenly you're forced with this choice. You either have to lower the prices back down to where they were before the bubble, and that can leave the people who bought at the higher price miffed. Or you discontinue the model and make something new that comes in at the lower price that's a little bit more bubble safe. Or you can keep it the same, but you risk a serious sales hit as people reevaluate the actual worth in light of the competition. Because once the bubble pops, people look at the product and just go like, well, okay, this is the price tag, this is what's on the table. Sounds right, or that's a little high. And if the hype that was built into the price tag that made that a reasonable price isn't there anymore, it doesn't look very good. And a number of good makers have been burned by raising their prices to match the hype, and then having a trouble finding a way to get that back down. Custom makers, like people who make one-off custom knives, tend to have an easier time, as there's not like a set model with a set price. Instead, they just charge something different for every one, and so if they've kind of walked it up, they can walk it back down again a little bit more gradually. But still, this is always a danger. And, of course, custom makers, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your life, but it is something you should at least consider before you, raise your price for the bubbles there. But anyways, so that's the second issue with the price increases, is that it can put the makers in a very tough spot, especially when there's a bubble involved. The next issue with this is that it changes the competition. For instance, every time I do a review, and frankly, every time I look at buying something as a knife guy, I'm always thinking, okay, well, I could do this, or I could do something else. What else could I do instead? And certain knives end up in certain niches in price. You have knives, for instance, in that $40 range, like the steel wheel cut jack. There is just a bunch of knives in that $35, $40 range, and they're all competing against one another. But if you were to take this knife and you were to move it up to $80, it would suddenly start competing with a very different set of knives, and it might not work so well. Similarly, some materials change in acceptability as price goes up. Everybody's got different kind of criteria for this, but I'm willing to look past Teflon washes and a $30 knife. I'm willing to look past VG10 and like a knife, and not that VG10's bad, but over $100 it gets less impressive. And, D2 steel, it works great up until you hit like 150 or so. I'm not doing $600 for D2. I'm sorry. Sorry, Greg. But no, it's not a thing for me. And this is very subjective, but that's something you have to keep in mind, is that every time that you raise that price, you're changing the competition. You're changing the knives that you're up against. And if every other knife is in a higher end steel in your price range, then yours isn't going to look so good by comparison. So it's important not to raise yourself out of the bracket that you can actually compete in. So that's third issue, is that it changes competition. Fourth one, for me as a reviewer, is really, really tough, because review and recommendations and things like saying it's a gem really depends pretty heavily on the price. I mean, for instance, take your Rat 1 and your D2 steel here. This is an incredible knife, absolutely 100%, and for $40, no freaking problem. But this would be a much harder knife to recommend if they were charging $100 for it. It would be a lot less impressive. It'd be like, well, okay, scales are plastic, and I mean, it'd still be a good knife, absolutely, but it's harder to recommend there. Similarly, the Benchmade 940 is a knife that I would just recommend every damn day of the week at $125. If this were $125, particularly the aluminum version, I would be all over that and sending people there every damn day. But when they put it up to $170, it gets harder. And the Hinderer XM18 is a knife that I don't substantially love, but the thing is, if they were charging, 160 or 200 bucks for that, I would recommend it on a pretty regular basis because it is a pretty solid knife. It's just, and so gem really does shift very much. If you charge way more for something, it might go out of gem range. Or if you lower the price substantially, it might come into gem range. People think about it as being some inherent property. No, it's the value is absolutely a part of it. And substantial price changes can substantially change your review. Take the Shaman, the Spyderco Shaman. It is still, in my mind, a gem, even at the higher end price, because it still is outperforming many knives that are even more expensive. ZT has a whole host of knives in that 200 to 260 range that I think the Shaman outperforms. I like the Shaman better, enough better than the PM2, for instance, that I still like it better at that higher price or something like that. I still like that knife very, very much. I'm just not quite as enthusiastic as I was previously, and there's now a much bigger reason to go with the PM2 instead of the Shaman, which is, did I say Shaman? Weird. Anyways, which is probably why they made the change, actually. I kind of suspect that they moved the Shaman up just to get it off the PM2's back a little bit. But what do I know? I have no inside track information there. But the Shaman, to me, is still a gem. It's still absolutely worth it. The Delica is a knife that's starting to feel the heat with these price increases. At 60 bucks, this knife makes a lot of sense. It's really, really substantially good. At 75 bucks, though, it's starting to feel the competition a lot more because there are a lot of really nice knives in VG10 from other companies coming in there, using maybe higher-end materials, using so this is still a very good knife. It's still something I'm going to recommend, but you start feeling those gaps a little bit more, and especially, for instance, the cut jack here, which comes in at like 40 bucks, compared to your Delica here, you're seeing D2 versus VG10, you're seeing about the same handle, and so you just start to wonder, okay, what's the gap here? I don't know. I still like the Delica. I still recommend the Delica, but it's getting a lot harder to like and recommend as they keep putting the price up there. And you can find knives that are going to outperform it by a pretty solid margin. The Rask and the Norseman are really, really tough in this domain because, look, at 925 bucks for this knife, if I were to buy one brand new, it's still pretty damn good relative to the competition. Absolutely 100%. Walking around Blade Show, even with 925 bucks in my pocket, I'd be hard-pressed to find a knife with the same level of fit and finish, with the same level of machining as I would on this guy. And so I think it still can compete. But the thing is, that's a large amount of money. 100%. This is a price that the 925 is a price where you could buy 2 or 3 knives that are just not far behind. You could get a Koenig Arius and a Millet Torrent for that price. You could get a North Arm Skaha and an Arius and throw in a Delica for kicks. I mean, that is a lot of freaking money to spend. And I'm hearing more from people who are kind of on the fence when they're getting picked from the lottery. A lot of people get picked because they're doing like a Maker's Choice lottery thing. People message me like, Nick, I just got picked on the Maker's Choice thing, but did you know they increased the price? And so the big question is, well, how bad do you want it? It's a great knife, 100%, but that's a lot of money for a great knife. And so, versus, I think, a few months ago would have been an insta-buy. And so it actually kind of feels like, whether they intended it or not, this price increase is starting to deflate the bubble a little bit here. And that's absolutely healthy, and frankly, it may even be their plans. I mean, the Grimsmos are smart guys, and they're talking, like in their Instagram for New Year's, they're talking about doing flashlights next. So maybe they're just trying to cool the knife game down a little bit, while at the same time cashing in on the popularity. They're making a little bit of money by selling at the higher price and reducing demand so they can catch up a little bit on other things. I don't know. I'm not a businessman, but I hope that they do have a plan here because, like I said, they are running that risk of pricing into the bubble that could really burn them if they don't have a plan there. And so, but nonetheless, as a reviewer, these price increases make my life difficult because it can invalidate old videos or just make them very, very different. That, if I have a video that says, wow, this is an incredible knife for 60 bucks, and now people are commenting, yeah, Beck, but it's 75 now. Like, yeah, I know, it was filmed a year ago, call me. But, and nonetheless, it gets very hard to keep opinions straight there. Then finally, on the bad side for these price increases, knives are just getting really expensive. This is a really common refrain pretty much everywhere, on every forum and every comment. Every time you post something that's, in the 150, 200 range, people will say something along the lines, well, yeah, it's a great knife, but Nick, I need a knife for work, for my camping, for hunting, whatever, for my life, and I'm just struggling to find one that fits my needs and the budget. Mind you, there are still really great options. options. You get knives like your Kershaw Link, your Dividend, your Steel Wheels, your Ontarios of the world. There are out there, but it is really rough to see more companies drifting up and up and up and up and up and up and out of these people's wallets. And it's kind of scary to me, I'll be honest, as an American who does cheer for American manufacturing, although not at the cost of everybody else, certainly. But it scares me when American companies are kind of increasingly splitting themselves between cheap overseas-made crap in blister packs on one end and really expensive quality tools. There are a lot of companies that are just either racing hard to the bottom or racing to the top, but there's nothing left in that middle range there. And so it scares me to see knives drifting out of that mid-range of really great knives that are also really great values, because that pushes more people into the arms of things like Terrible Steels, build quality, and Z-Hunters, and that's just frightening to me. So anyways, to me at least, those are my thoughts on the price increases here. I mean, it's not generally a great thing, although I certainly understand the yearly cost of living, cost of doing business price increases. I get that part, and I don't begrudge any company for, raising their prices to pay people a living wage. But when you get these kinds of, really big hikes, whether it's on an individual product or on an individual line, something like that, it's got some issues. And those issues are, as I said, that it doesn't look good very usually, it's not even a thing. It can put makers in a pretty tough spot. It can change the competition pretty substantially. As a reviewer, it drives me nuts because it just screws my old reviews, and it just increases this ongoing trend of knives just getting too damn pricey, and that's just not a beautiful thing. So anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you, that I have adequately addressed these price changes that you've been asking me to address, but mostly I hope that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful and surprisingly inexpensive rest of your day. Bye now.